Hello, everyone. I come here to present you kind of a controversial idea for a digital preservation conference, which is to actually delete things that are in our digital preservation repository. So I'm going to explain a bit why do we need that and how do we go about it. But before that, a bit of introduction and a recap. KEEP supports the open source digital repository RODA, which supports main activities necessary to ensure the long-term access and reusability of digital information. It's available on that website. It's a project that has been active for the last 17 years, almost as old as the DPC. And it was originally funded by the Portuguese National Archives and then grew beyond borders with the EC-funded projects like SCAPE, York, and CEF archiving. And also with a public institution sponsoring of certain features that they needed. And the sponsor for the feature I'm going to present was the Swedish Customs. So RODA is a long-term digital repository that supports the main functional units of the OIS reference model. It focuses on large corporations and public bodies. It's a fully featured repository able to integrate with existing systems via well-defined protocols and open standards. It is 100% built upon open source technologies. It focuses on authenticity by the use and production of preservation metadata using premise, together with features that cope with the technical requirements of ISO 16363. It does preservation actions via plugins that you can add into the system. It supports file format conversion, preservation planning, risk management, and representation information management within the system. It is horizontally scalable, focused on fully auditable, and it allows integration with third-party systems using a REST API. So RODA and other preservation systems alike, if not all, is normally viewed as the final destination only for records that are marked for permanent conservation. But what we've seen in real-world cases, like the Swedish Customs, and whenever we get a bit out of our domain and whenever the digital preservation archive is more close to the production system and blurs the line between them, we see that not only these kind of records need to be put into the preservation system, and sometimes we need to actually delete the records that are in the preservation system. So in this presentation, I'll try to respond why do we need to preserve content that is eventually going to be deleted, and why to delete content that's already being preserved. So is destruction needed? Well, country legal requirements define rules that for destruction of paper and digital records after a defined period of time. Sometimes they are not clear. If you can, you should, or you must destroy. It depends on the country. It depends on the domain. Sometimes it's not specified. Most of the times it is given for interpretation or for the specific assessment of the one interpreting the rules. But I will argue that destruction has its values. For once, it can reduce costs and effort, human effort, and also environmental impact that you've seen a lot speaking during this conference, because they are correlated with the amount of records and amount of data that you need to preserve on your system. But more than that, it relates also to the right to be forgotten. Whenever there are records that are finished fulfilling their or supporting their institutional activities, and they can contain personal information, then we must destroy the records. On the other hand, why do we need to worry about preserving records that are eventually going to be destroyed Well, we are dealing here with long retention periods in the sizes of decades. For instance, the health records need to be preserved through the lifetime of the patients, of the people, which is in average 80 years. So some of the records belong to this person will need to be kept for that amount of time. And then another question comes that if you're not going to transfer so when do we actually need to transfer records and data to a preservation system? Well, I will argue that it will depend. It depends on the record, it depends on the format, it depends on the content. You can say that you can keep it on the production system or don't worry about preservation whenever you can trust the technological landscape that is compatible with the formats within the system, within the record. But this is kind of a case-by-case analysis. The Portuguese National Archive defines here a kind of rule of thumb of 7 years. 7 years of existence. If a record should exist more than 7 years, then you should worry, or you should actually define a preservation plan for it, which many times includes transferring it to a digital preservation system. So if we do need to destroy things in the digital preservation system, let's at least do it right. So what we did was first to align with the terminology or identify the definitions that were on the community that were important to this project. We used two use cases, the Swedish Customs and the Portuguese National Archives, very different countries and use cases. And then we selected standards that could define the retention and destruction processes and implemented them into the RODA system. So, in terms of terminology, so definitions, appraisal, it's defined as the process of evaluating records to determine if they are to be retained forever, if they are to be kept for a certain period, or if they are to be destroyed. Selection is if they are to be added to the system, and retention and destruction, which is kind of overlaps with these definitions, is the process of determining which records to retain and how and for how long. It's a decision-making process that involves several parties and sometimes even needs to go beyond organizational boundaries. So this process is normally done before doing or transferring to the digital preservation system or during the process of transferring. But now we want to do this during the preservation of records. So, analyzing the use cases we have, we see that we identified two different ways of going about to define which disposal schedule each record should have. The Swedish Customs, which organize and define the disposal of records of their own institution, define them by series. So the archival hierarchy is how they also define the retention periods of the records. The series and collections the records belong to define within its scope by inheritance the retention periods for all its records. On the other hand, the Portuguese National Archives, which define the rules for retention for all public institutions within Portugal, define a very different strategy. They do this by classification on metadata. So they define here a classification scheme, a national one. Records can belong to multiple classes, and depending on the classes they belong to, they define the retention period and disposal action they need to incur. So it's an orthogonal organization to the archival hierarchy, which is defined by institution. Looking at the use cases and looking at the standards, the standard that struck us as more appropriate to define the process of disposal schedule was the MOREC 2010. In MOREC, a record cannot never be deleted in full. There always remains a residual record that proves that, well, that once it existed, and also it was properly disposed under the appropriate disposal schedule. The schedule itself determines how long a record is retained and how it is to be disposed of. In MOREC and in RODA, a schedule has a title, a description, information about mandate, scope notes, and it identifies the disposal action, the retention trigger, and the period. In RODA, we implemented these disposal actions. So retain permanently, keep it forever, to review at the end of retention period, and to destroy at the end of retention period. We did not include implementations for transfer or full review workflow because this was defined as outside of the scope for the users that we wanted to have. In the retain permanently, a record is kept forever, and if marked with this retention period, all methods that allow change or destruction are disallowed even to administration permissions or users. The disposal action must always be changed before allowing any information destruction. When a record is marked to be reviewed, it will be reviewed after a retention period, but we don't support the full review confirmation process that the MOREC defines with very strict timelines. Instead, records simply must be assigned with a different disposal schedule to be taken out of the review overdue list. This can be to move them to be destroyed or destruction schedule, to be moved to a permanent conservation schedule, or to move to a review schedule with a larger retention period. Of course, we can limit which ones are allowed, so you cannot postpone this forever. The destruction in RODA requires a formal destruction confirmation workflow. This is an extension to the MOREC where we actually require a printable report to be produced, and when the destruction is executed, the descriptive metadata is pruned and all files associated with the record are destroyed, leaving the record in the residual state. To be able to manage this more easily, we define here an automatic way to associate which disposal schedules for records that are within the system or are being added to the system every day. So we define here disposal rules, which are a prioritized list of requirements to determine the disposal schedule with a selection method and identification of the schedule. These selection methods include the hierarchy, archival hierarchy for the series method, or a metadata field for the classification method. Besides all of this, MOREC also defines here as a requirement a disposal hold, which mainly are legal or other administrative orders, like a court order or an audit, that interrupts the normal disposal process for certain records. After the disposal hold is lifted, then the disposal schedule normal procedure is resumed. The disposal confirmation itself is a formal process in RODA that confirms the destruction of records. It creates a report that is customizable, that aggregates all necessary metadata from the records to be destroyed in a printable format. This then needs to be formally accepted, for example, signed, and then the destruction needs to be explicitly requested. After the destruction, we added here kind of a feature for the Swedish Customs at their request for kind of a safety net to allow the recovery of records that were improperly destroyed. After destruction, they are kept in a logically separated storage, inaccessible to any RODA method, except for the restore or permanent destruction. The permanent destruction can then be set up to be automatic after a period of time. So, going quickly by the walkthrough from the webpage or the interfaces, there is a new menu in RODA called Disposal and a new page called Disposal Policies. Here you can manage your disposal schedules, your disposal rules, and your disposal holds. creating disposal schedule, you define the metadata about it, plus the action, the retention trigger, and retention period. So it will, from when do we will start counting? From the start date, from the end date, or from any publishing date, and until when do we allow it to be kept? A disposal rule then identifies the schedule and selects the selects the rule that allows you to associate automatically with records. Then you can, or records that are ingested or received every day can be associated automatically using the rules, but you can also apply the rules on the button there to everything that already exists on your system. On the record itself, you can see a badge about the destruction or the retention state or disposal state with a calculation on when it will be destroyed. You can associate disposal holds, and if you associate that, then it will be displayed on hold. And if you click this badge, you'll see the retention period calculated and all the information about the schedule and the holds that are associated with it. To go through the confirmation, it's a different page. You periodically go to this page to see all overdue records for destruction and review. And you can select multiple records, create a confirmation with some metadata which is configurable. You can have several pending confirmations, and clicking on the confirmation, you'll see a report which can be changed, a template with information. You can select the information you want to appear here about the records and the global branding of it. You can print it, and in the end, you can select to destroy the associated records. After the records are destroyed, they are no longer in the catalog or the search. They are, although searchable and viewable on a specific page of destroyed records where you can search by them. You can then view the prune metadata, see when it was destroyed, who destroyed it, and the reports of the destruction. After permanently delete the records, the report stays there, but you can no longer recover the data. Every step of the way, we create or produce preservation events for assignment of disposal schedules, for disposal holds, for disposal confirmations, and for the ultimate destruction, in even with the restore of the records. Rhoda was actually released last year, but the pandemic didn't allow us to show this before. Last year we did release the retention and disposal plus the creation translation, and it's available on GitHub. We also included here some York AIP 2.0 support on our tools. And currently we are working or finishing up Rhoda 5, where we'll be developing a distributed digital preservation. In here, we are currently developing a way of Rhoda preserving content that's not within its control by referencing content within the institution production storage. Migration and metadata outcomes are kept within the agent storage, and for that we needed some extensions. This then relates to a central instance of Rhoda, which is the main idea is to be controlled, for example, by the Portuguese National Archives or by a national archive, which then connects by the Rhoda agents in each member institution, and it's where preservation planning takes place. Metadata and about records, files, processes, representation information, risks is synchronized into Rhoda Central, everything except the data itself. You can then do your preservation planning, ask requests, processes for diagnosing, for action, for migration, and this is in the end carried out on the agents and reported back. Some other news and highlights. So the Swedish Customs have been running Rhoda 4 in production since 2021. Portuguese National Archives is currently testing Rhoda 5 and going into production later this year. And a bit of a remark also of a DPC award finalist, the São João University Hospital Center is running also this system, and He was the DPC Award finalist this year. And in different news connected to the last presentation, the York CSP came out. It's a 2-year EU-funded project led by the Austrian Institute of Technology that aims to develop York information packages and also SIARD and support the digital board. So thank you very much, and if you have any questions, please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Luis. Is there any questions online first, Edith? Have you? Oh, while she's doing that, are there any questions in the room first? The gentleman with the excellent T-shirt sitting over there. I think we all know who I'm talking about.
Hello, my name is Daniel from the National Library of Norway. I just had a quick question. In the beginning, you mentioned need for deletion because of the right to be forgotten. I just wondered how does that play with the built-in part of your system where you keep the record that, yes, this record existed, but it was deleted. Like, wouldn't that kind of go against the right to be forgotten, where it's like, for example, you can see that, oh, there is a medical record for John Doe born on this and that, but he requested it to be deleted because he wanted to be forgotten. Wouldn't that kind of...
You're meaning the prune metadata?
Yeah.
Well, basically, then this depends on your configuration. You can select that metadata to be deleted. But it's a kind of a hard question because the specification requires you maintain a residual record that should at least identify what the record was about. And is that information necessary to understand what the record was about? So you might come into a situation where the residual record will not have anything that is identifiable from the beginning. So I guess this needs to be analyzed case by case, and in the end you might go into a situation where they are not, the records need to be completely deleted, leaving no residual space, or on the other hand see that take this with a grain of salt, because these records are not public. The destroyed records will only be available to a specific set of people that need to audit the system that is destroying the records in a proper manner. So the right to be forgotten could be only associated with public records, or at least records that are for purposes of consultation and not for the purposes of audits, I would argue.
I don't know how to use this, so I'm going to use this mic. Is there any other questions, or can I just interject with a question? That's all right. I was going to ask about what similarities and what differences did you find? Obviously, you were built for a Portuguese organisation. You've got other clients in Portugal, but you're now, you're working with the Swedish Institute. What did you find? What were the differences?
So there are a lot of differences. For once, the way Portuguese National Archive does it is more structured, but more rule-based, mainly because they actually need to do this to so many other institutions. So they cannot go by record, defining the rules of retention. So they cannot be so fine-grained within their definitions. While the Swedish customs are able to do this more fine-grained work on every record, at least on every series. So mainly this is a very different outset of administrative archives, and the Swedish customs will also have some private funds that could have archivists that are focused on those collections. So it really depends how you are doing things. But I think we got into a situation that you can accumulate both. So if your way of working to be simple, you can use your catalog to already organize how you want records to be destroyed. It will make you kill two birds with the same stone, let's say. But in situations where you cannot do that, then a more complex system, because it's much more complex to do this with classification. But there's no other way around if they need to do that for so many institutions outside their control.
Just checking, are there any more online?
No more questions online,
No
no.
more questions online. We might have some time at the end if there's any questions to arise later, but I just want to, if we can...
I think there is a
thank-
question
yeah.
there. Just
I'm sorry.
Hi.
In the right top. Hi, Ruth.
Sorry, I just had a quick question. I saw that you put up there on one of your slides that you were working on a Croatian translation, I think. In terms of your solution, how many languages is it available in? Is there areas you're working towards making it available to and expanding out?
I'm not completely sure how many. It's in Portuguese, English, Hungarian, Croatian, Spanish. And the Swedish translation is being produced currently. We integrate with Transifex, which is kind of a translation web platform, and you can go there and be our translator and translate the system to your own language. Okay, thank you very much.